Lynch, your host for HFK Presents 5 Minutes of History. It's February, and that means President's Day is just around the corner. And so for the next couple of webcasts, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the Presidents of the United States of America. And what better way to start than with the first president, none other than George Washington, General Washington himself. As a matter of fact, he wasn't always known as General Washington or His Excellency. George really wanted to be a gentleman farmer. Raised in Virginia, George learned how to ride a horse at an early age and spent most of his time out on his father's farm observing the land itself. Desiring himself to become a plantation owner, he amassed a great deal of land. It was interrupted for a little while when he went to work with the British Army during the French and Indian Wars. George hoped that one day he'd become an officer in the British military, only to find out, because he was born in the colonies, the British military would only allow him to be an officer in the colonial militia, what you would consider a demotion. So George left his ideas of becoming a military leader and decided to go back to farming. This is a reoccurring theme in George's life, as you'll see along the way. Well, he raised many different crops, but his most important crop was tobacco. He had made arrangements with an agent in London to represent him at market. So each year, George would take his tobacco crop, ship it off to London with a quoted price. Every year, that tobacco was then sold at market by that agent for a lower price than George was quoted. It gets better. George would then leave instructions on what that agent was to buy with those funds and send it back so Martha would have the finest of all goods that could be found in London. Every year, the agent would quote him a price, and every year, those goods would cost more than he was quoted. So in essence, George was getting less for his tobacco and paying more for the goods that were shipped back. George wrote the agent saying, "If I continue at this rate with you, it won't be too soon until I will be bankrupt and indebted to you into the next century." So George did what any good, sensible man would do. He refused to do business with that man anymore and said he would pay back the debts already owed. But now, well, how was George going to make money? Very simple. Those same fields he had, he used some of that crop in a different way. He took some of his plantation and turned it into a distillery where he made whiskey. Whiskey that didn't have to be shipped over to Europe. Whiskey that could be sold to the different colonies up and down the coastline. This way, George didn't have the interference of a London agent who basically was taking him for granted. Not unlike most of the colonies were crying about. London taking the colonies for granted. It was the beginning of the revolution. For George, it started on his plantation. For others, it started with the different taxes, like the stamp tax that would come out to unfairly tax those who lived in the colonies. So there is the answer to my question from last week. What do tobacco, whiskey, and rebellion have in common? The answer? Our first president, General George Washington. Oh my goodness. Do you see that? It's time for trivia. Here's your trivia question for today. What were George Washington's teeth made out of? I know you're all screaming at your computers. Wood, wood. No, they weren't made out of wood at all. As a matter of fact, they were made out of something more interesting. Ivory, donkey, and cow teeth. Yes, and a few horse teeth along the way. They were held together by a metal spring mechanism that caused a great deal of pain in George's mouth. I guess that's why you never see him smiling in those different paintings, only leaving a closed-mouthed scowl upon his face. Truth is, by the time George became president, he only had one tooth to his name. Yep, there's your trivia. Now, if you have something that you'd like to find out about, something dealing with any type of history, send me a note, ask me a question, write me a line. You can email me at info@hfkpresents.com. If you don't want to email, take a look at the bottom of the blog. There's a place for comments. Or if you find this on YouTube, there's a space for comments there as well. Feel free to ask your questions, and down the road, who knows? I may just be able to answer that question for you right here on 5 Minutes of History. Well, we are just about out of time, so I'm going to have to say goodbye until next week. If you want to find out more about me, take a look at my websites, or take a look at my blogs, All the information comes at the very end of this credit that's going to roll any moment now. I'm your host, Terry Lynch, for 5 Minutes of History. Remember, watch out. History happens when you least expect it.